record this so we have it. And then I'll be sure to send these out later so we can just kind of see where we went. Okay. All right. So where they're talking about in the first paragraph, we've got some scholars here. And our scholars, oh, where's my highlighter? So our scholars are talking about, they're marking a point in history, which is really interesting. Whenever scholars are talking, we get really interested because they have things to say. And we want to keep track of our key players. We want to keep track of what they think and do. So what they are saying, they're declaring that there's a point in history and where Cesar Chavez and his unionizing efforts marked the beginning of Chicano political activism in the 60s. And I don't usually highlight a whole ton of phrases. In this case, I probably would, because whenever we mark the beginning of something, we probably want to know what it is. And this was his unionizing efforts that marked this change among Mexican and American farm laborers in California. So they're setting our broad stage and context. Based on this, we can already tell that our author is just trying to give us some background information. They're trying to help us paint a timeline here. By 1965, Chavez's United Farm Workers gained international recognition. And then you wonder why. They initiated a worldwide boycott of grapes. That's impressive, boycotting grapes all over the world in an effort to get growers to sign union contracts. So this is what they're doing. And we probably don't need to spend a whole lot of time here because they're just giving us the play-by-play, what happened in history. And this happened in 1965. And then they also tell us in line 9, 1965 is important for another reason. There was a birth. So there was the marking the beginning of political activism and the birth of contemporary Chicano theater. And that is the year Valdez approached Chavez about using theater to organize farm workers. So 1965 is important for two reasons. We have Chavez and the political activism, and then we have the birth of Chicano theater. Valdez and the members of the resulting Teatro Campesino are generally credited by scholars as having initiated the Chicano theater movement, a movement that would reach its apex in the 1970s. So we just kind of think what they've done for us here. They're giving us a little bit of a timeline. And what we want to look at is, what happened before, what happened after, and we can compare to this timeline. So we've got, the 70s and beyond. 70s is when Chicano theater was at its apex. It started in 65. Maybe I should use a different color. So here's theater. Here's all these important things happening. This is a really big year, 1965. Theater is going all the way up into the apex in the 70s and beyond. Before 1965, we've got some in the 1960s onward. Chavez is doing all this, organizing work. We've got political activism going on. And this is the point at which, 1965, this whole passage or paragraph is about 1965 being really, really important, right? So what paragraph 1 is doing is giving us broad overview and context. This is our history. So if we have any questions about timeline, if we have any questions about things that are happening, we know we're going to go to paragraph 1. They're starting to unfold for us why 1965 was so important. How are we feeling about this so far?
Jasmine, on the actual, the test, do you recommend I get worried about spending too much time, but I know it's obviously important to understand the full extent of the passage. Do you recommend drawing out timelines or doing visuals, or is it kind of just different, depending on the person?
It depends on the person, because I think I kind of try to keep it in my head. And I think especially if it's usually in terms of dates, they don't give dates very often on the LSAT, but when they do, it's usually saying that something is important. Here's what happened before and here's what happened afterward. So if you can kind of think your beginning, middle, end, just not necessarily drawing it out on your paper, it's going to be helpful to pay attention to and can sometimes help you keep everything straight in terms of what they say paused to something else. But it's all individual. Some people might say okay, so we have 1965, these things happened in 1965, and now we see where we're going to go. Totally up to you. And I think you can try different things. If building a timeline helps you, then maybe try it out. You never know. Okie dokie. So now we've got, paragraph 2. So we know they gave us historical context in paragraph 1. And so they can either say, like, what normally happens is they zoom in. Typically, if you get really broad overview context in paragraph 1, they have to zoom in on some aspect of it. So we'll see what's going on. In the fall of 1965, so we're focusing in on 1965 again, Valdez gathered a group of small striking farm workers and asked them to talk about their working conditions. So we know that in 65, Valdez approaches Chavez to talk about, how can we make theater work for this political activism? And now it looks like it's zooming all the way in on Chavez and how he's creating the Chicano theater movement. I probably should have highlighted that before, but we're getting to see what are the ins and outs of this. A former farm worker himself, Valdez was no stranger to the players in the daily drama that was field work. So this is, stemming from his own perspective. And he's asking people, what's going on the picket lines. And the less timid in the audience delighted in acting out their ridicule of the strike breakers. So we have these people, from all sorts of different, extroversion to introverted. They were super excited to just be asked a question and to act it out. So it sounds like he's saying, how would you portray like what's going on in the picket lines? And they just kind of, do something random, getting out of their comfort zone. Using the farm workers' basic improvisations, Valdez guided the group towards the creation of what he termed actos, skits or sketches whose roots scholars have traced to various sources that had influenced Valdez as a student and a member of the San Francisco mime troupe. That is so random. Why are we talking about mime troops here? But what's going on is, he's looking at these different farm workers. They're improving here. They're kind of acting out all these different scenes from what they see in daily life, and he creates these skits, these actos. And then the scholars have gone back and looked at them and said, oh, our actos, his skits that he's written, they come from these influences that, they look at him as a student and as a mime troupe member, and they see that there's some common themes here. They're not necessarily saying that anything is caused, but they are saying that there's some common themes. Spanning beyond the initial setting of flatbed truck stages at the field's edges. So they're saying, people initially started performing on flatbed trucks on the edges of the fields. We don't really know where these fields are. It's kind of vague. The acto became the quintessential form of Chicano theater in the 1960s. So this is, the acto is creating Chicano theater. It is so important. So now they've zoomed in on Valdez to talk about what are his methods, and then why is the acto so important? What did he contribute to this space? What is the Chicano theater movement? According to Valdez, the acto should suggest a solution to the problems exposed in the brief comic statement. So there's some comedy going on, that they're supposed to propose a solution. And we've got Valdez giving us a suggestion. He thinks it should, or not a suggestion, but he's got an opinion. Here's what the acto should be in his view. So we want to pay attention to that, because that's probably the first opinion that we get in this passage. And as with any good political theater, so it's politically based, it should satirize the opposition and inspire the audience to social action. So this is a work that he, there's some comedy involved, there's some satire. He wants it to be solution-based, and it's all steeped in political action. Because actos were based on participants' personal experiences, so you remember, people are acting stuff out, and he took that and put it into the work. They had palpable immediacy. So, palpable immediacy, if we think about palpable, that means you can touch it, and immediacy means it's current. So you can feel what's going on, from the personal experiences. You're able to really connect with the people who are involved, the actors, the writers. You're able to see your personal experiences in the work. How are we doing with paragraph 2? Any thoughts, commentary? Feeling good? Okey-dokey. So we know paragraph 1 is our historical context, it's our broad overview, and then in paragraph 2, we've zoomed in on Valdez. We know, what does he do? How did he create this Chicano theater? And what should it be? They described the theater, the context. They described what it should be. So they spent a good part of our paragraph talking about what is it about. they're saying, they're listing all these qualities of it. And whenever they do that, you might want to pay attention at least to where to find it, because they love to give us, line reference questions on what was being said. So we'll probably go here, probably for a question, more likely than not. Now we're looking at paragraph 3. So if we have our broad context, our broad history, and then we have a zoomed in view of what the acto is, how Valdez built Chicano theater, we want to see what's going on in paragraph 3 and how it relates to our argument. Because right now it looks like the main point is that Valdez created a lot of important work for political activism, but we really it's not fully formed yet. We want to get to the main point. They haven't really gotten there. They've just given us building blocks. In her book, El Teatro Campesino, so somebody new here, Yolanda, my girl Yolanda Broiles Gonzalez, rightly criticizes theater historians for having tended to credit Valadez individually with inventing actos as a genre. Okay, so here's our author coming out and saying, she's right for criticizing. And this is important. Yolanda, if she's criticizing, she's got some strong views. So we want to pay attention to those. And it said that theater historians, typically credit Valdez individually with inventing actos as a genre. So we can get the sense that she does not think that she either thinks that he didn't create the genre, which is hard because, the author already has given us, the way that he's created the genre. So really it looks like it's going to be an issue with the word individually. And if we continue on with our sentence, it says, as if the striking farm workers' improvisational talent had depended entirely on his vision and expertise for the form it took. So she's really picking a bone here with the idea of him as an individual creating the genre. She's saying, all these people contributed their improvisations to the work to create the genre, so they should also be credited. Or, we should at least acknowledge he didn't do it by himself. She traces especially the actos connections to a similar genre, okay, so we got another genre, of informal, often satirical shows known as carpas that were performed in tents to mainly working class audiences. So we've got this other genre, and she's saying, the actos is really similar to this other genre. And we're trying to figure out how is she building her argument, because she says he didn't do this by himself, and we see that there's a similar genre. And they're very, very similar because they're informal, they're satirical, mostly working class audiences. So we're going to see where she goes with this. Carpas had flourished earlier in the 20th century in the border area of Mexico and the United States. So they're giving us some context as to where it happened. Many participants in the formation of the teatro, no doubt, had substantial cultural links to this tradition. So she said they were influenced by it. And if they're influenced by it and they are the ones informing the work of actos, we can probably assume that that's she's going to argue that it's integrated into the actos. So there's some common roots and themes. And she goes ahead and says that right there. It likely adapted it to their improvisation. So this probably inspired them to improvise the way that they did. The earlier development of the Teatro Campesino was, in fact, a collective accomplishment. I love that word, that phrase. That's great. Still, Valdez's artistic contribution was a crucial one. So she's not saying he shouldn't be given any credit. She's saying, let's just get straight that he's not the individual creator. It was a collective accomplishment. For the resulting actos were neither carpas nor theater in the European tradition of Valdez's academic training. So she says, Valdez contributed a lot because actos are not carpas and they're not European theater, but they're a distinctive genre that connect to both. So they're this whole new genre that takes from all these different things. It takes from carpas, it takes from European theater, and we have actos. So he did contribute quite a bit. How are we feeling about this paragraph right here?
In this paragraph, she says that even though I have all these issues with him being the sole person being credited for actos, he still had a big hand in it, and I don't deny that.
Right. So this is where we get the main point. So the paragraph 1 is our historical context. Paragraph 2 is bringing us back to this idea of, how did Valdez create this work? And then 3, Yolanda's out here saying, wait, so he didn't create it by himself. Here's another genre that the people definitely took from, and it definitely influenced it. But he's the one that tied the corpus and the European theater together. So like if we think about what the takeaway is, it's that Valdez, created a genre that was a collective accomplishment. I really love that phrase at the end for sure. All right, so let's go ahead and tackle these questions before Nicole like combines us all again. I think we've got some time. And feel free to pull this up on your side and scroll as you need to. So it's asking us which one of the following most accurately expresses the main point of the passage. And you can go ahead and kind of chat your answers in the chat, and I'll kind of monitor those, give some commentary. And we'll give it like a minute or two. And it's okay to pick your best gut choice. Like we're going pretty quickly, and I'm going to push you to just kind of go with your gut, because you're going to see like your gut choice. There's always implications of picking your gut choice. So I'll stop talking, give you a moment to think for a minute.
Can we just make sure we all send it directly to you and not to everyone so we don't get the
Yeah.
answer before we decide on one?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, thanks.
Great. All right, so we've got quite a few answers. If you haven't quite gotten there yet, just kind of let us know if you're between anything. All right. I'm so excited because y'all all picked the same answer, and it's right. So C is our answer. Do we have any trouble with this one?
I kind of went with my gut, like you said. And I know we don't have a ton of time, so if you can't like speak to this right now, that's okay. But like in general, like I definitely have trouble identifying the main point versus like the argument in or the conclusion in like an LR passage.
Yeah, and that's because there's so much more information to work with. You have to decipher what's the point of paragraph 1, 2, and 3, and how do those fit together into an argument. So if we think about 1 is like our intro, so there's nothing in the argument there. That's like a set of facts, if you will. Paragraph 2 is saying how Valdez built the work, and then paragraph 3 is saying, well, you have this, and then you also have like, so Valdez is like the, here's his contribution, and 3 is contextualizing that with it's a collective accomplishment, and that's really where they leave the main point. The main point all comes in the end. So sometimes it's just zooming in, so you can zoom out and look at all the different pieces. All right, and we can definitely chat too. I think we'll probably we're really speeding through this, and we probably will have some time. We just got a lot of questions is all. Number 14, the author uses the word immediacy in line 39, most likely in order to express what? And I can also go there. Is it helpful? Is anybody having trouble pulling it up on their own? It needs me to move over. And this one's a trickier one. I think in our last group, we had quite a few people get stuck between things. So it's okay if you got 2 answers too. Looks like we've got a lot of between. This is hard. There's a really strong sucker choice on this one. All right, so almost everyone was between C and E. Okay, and one of these is the right answer, and one is like the most popular wrong answer. So this is a good place to be. So I'm glad we went through A, B, and D, and we said no, we don't like those. Let's start with C, the ease of which the Teatro Campesino members were able to develop actos based on their own experiences. So this is what makes this a really compelling answer choice, is that, you know, we know we're talking about experiences. And if we think back to line 39, you know, because actos were based on participants' personal experiences, they had palpable immediacy. So people are going to latch on to personal experiences if they don't know what palpable immediacy means. But if we remember, what they're saying is that, you know, the personal experience makes it relatable, makes it tangible. You know, he took real experiences to create these works. Now, if we think about E, how vividly the actors conveyed the performers' experiences to their audiences. So they're both talking about the experience. The difference between these answer choices is whether it's the ease of how the members were able to create the works, or just how vividly the actors conveyed the experiences. What do we think about this? Anybody want to change their answers, or commit to an answer right now?
I had C, but maybe I'll change to E. I reread a part of the passage.
I'm gonna do the opposite. I had E and I think I'm gonna change it to E.
I'm making you all second guess yourselves. So if we look back at it, so according to Valdez, like, this is what everything should do. It should inspire the audience, should satirize the opposition. You know, it's talking about, you know, what is the purpose of it. And then they're saying, because there's personal experience involved, it's palpable immediacy, like it's really relatable. And so there's something about necessarily about how we're crafting the actos, because if we remember, the members are not really crafting it, it's Valdez. And we're not talking about the ease of being able to create it. We're talking about how much does that connect? How much are you connecting to the experience of the performers? Because if we remember, our audiences are also these people who have similar experiences. So if the performers are conveying it and the people are watching it, they're like, wait, I get that. I feel that. That's where palpable comes from. And immediate means like the current. You feel it in the current. This was tricky. The E is going to be our answer, because they want you to lock on experiences, but we don't talk about the ease of developing it. How are we feeling about this? I made you second guess yourselves.
Yeah, when I first did it, I put C, but then I reread that sentence you pointed out before you pointed it out, and then that's where I was able, where it said it should satirize the opposition and inspire. That's what made me switch it to E.
Yeah. Now, Mara, how did it feel? Like, so what was it that made you second guess?
Just that, like, in the paragraph itself, they don't speak about how the actors, you know, vividly portrayed their characters and how they were, like, you know, I mean, it does kind of say that they were really good at it, which is why I picked it in the first place, because they were good at it, which was why it had palpable immediacy. But in C, when I relooked at the entire thing, I'm like, okay, it's not that strong of a, you know, thing to say, as opposed to E, which is a very strong thing to say, that it was very vivid and they did it in a specific way, which doesn't say that there was a specific way they did it in the paragraph itself.
Mm-hmm. So this is a lesson in trusting your gut choice, because the more that we start to linger, if we're between things, we're going to catch into the ways, like they hope that we get these wrong. This test is designed partially by psychologists.
When do you know if it's your gut choice or if your brain not taking it properly and if it's wrong at that point?
So I think you walked into like conveying experiences, and the purpose of that palpable immediacy is for the audiences to receive that experience, to feel that experience. And I think that's what you picked up on. But when we thought about E, they also have something about experiences, and that makes people pause and panic. They're like, oh wait, did I get the right one about experiences? And then you're like, well, I guess if they're good at it, like, I guess it would be easy for them. You just supplied a bunch of information. That's what they want you to do, right? So trust your gut, because the second that we start overthinking, we supply more information, and the more that we supply information, it's just not on the page.
If you look at it, C gives sufficient information for E, basically. If there is C, then there is, E. Or basically the other way around. If they're vividly portraying it, that means that it was easy enough for them to do it.
Nice. All right, we're gonna hop on over to 15. The second sentence of the passage functions primarily in which of the following ways? So it's gonna be helpful for us to read that second sentence and try to anticipate it ourselves before we look at the answer choices. Because again, the more we sit and linger on answer choices, the more that they want us to get it wrong. So if we look at this, here's our second sentence. It's talking about the worldwide boycott of grapes by Cesar Chavez and the farm workers. And this is they're giving us part of our history here. So this is like reason number one why 1965 is correct. So how does this function in our paragraph right now?
It's background info.
It's background information, good. And it's building on this first sentence that says, this is the beginning of the Chicano political activist movement. And then they say, here's what happened. We had this worldwide boycott on grapes, and we got them to sign contracts. And then after that, that's when Valdez comes in and says, hey, you should use theater to organize people. So we're thinking about, how does this, what does this do for our argument? How are you feeling about this one? There's just a lot of words in here.
I only like half of my answer.
That's okay. That's okay. So it looks like we've got a pretty even split between A and E. So I'm glad. So one of these is right. All of these are wrong. All of these are absolutely wrong. So A, it helps explain both the motivation of those who develop the first actos, an important aspect of their subject matter. So if we remember, like that sentence was talking about the strike with the worldwide boycott of grapes. And if we do remember, these actos were coming into fruition because Valdez said, "Hey, let's use this for political theater and movement." So we do see a motivation there. The first actos being developed because of that. An important aspect of their subject matter, people are just talking about their experiences. So I imagine a lot of people, when he approached Chavez and said, "Let's make this theater happen," Chavez probably said, "Here, take these people, talk with them, make these experiences into some art that will really push our cause forward." If we look at E, it helps explain why theater historians in their discussions have treated them as though he were individually responsible. We know that this does come up in the passage in terms of the individual response versus collective accomplishment. But this is coming up, this would be closer into paragraph 3. We're waiting for them to say, some people think that he is individually responsible and here's all the reasons why, but we never actually fully get there later in the passage. A is the most correct answer because what it's saying is here's the context, here's why people organize, and here's how Chicano theater took root. How are we feeling about this answer choice?
Can you explain the motivation part for A? Because it didn't click for me, but I liked the second part where it talks about the subject matter.
Yeah, so the motivation, we think back about, so 1965, our sentence here says like, this is what happened. During that same year, oh, come on. Valdez also, wanted to work with the farm workers. And then it says like the movement, like this initiated the movement, like Valdez and the members of the resulting Teatro Campesino. We can get the sense that people started joining him to create this as a result of what was going on in 1965. Then we also, see that they're talking about like their working conditions. This is happening in the fall. So if we're thinking about, this is all in the same year, they're getting together for their fall potluck, let's say, and people are talking about, what's happening out here on the picket lines, what's happening with the strike breakers over here. So this boycott is a motivation for them to get involved, and it's the subject matter.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Alrighty. 16. The passage indicates that the early actos of the Teatro Campesino and the carpas were similar. Why? Hi, Nicole.
Hi, everybody. Okay, so real quick, I'm going to jump in, and Jasmine can say, however, we're going to go for you're welcome to leave because we're way over on time. But until 1:00 p.m. Eastern time, I'm going to continue going over must be true and most strongly supported questions. So if you would like to come join that session, you aren't going to offend Jasmine or either of I if you would rather do one or the other, or if Jasmine's okay continuing to review this, depending on, and you might, I don't know what your schedule is, Jasmine. Maybe you need to get going right now.
No, I've got some flex time.
So, but I just need to know because I have to move you to the room on how you would like the extra time to be spent. So Katie's group all came back to must be true, most strongly supported. But so which one would you guys like to do? They're on the spot.
I'll stay in this one. Thanks.
Okay. And just staying, going, what? Sorry?
Me, there must be true, please.
Yes. And everyone's like, I don't want to offend anybody.
Yeah, I won't be offended. And I've also, we happen to get through the rest of the questions too in the other group, and I can send, we'll post that recording too. So if you want to change your mind and you'd rather go over there, it's totally fine. I can send those to you. But folks are welcome to stay here and we can go back through the questions too. I have no qualms. It's going to be most helpful for you.
Nicole, I might go back to your group, but Jasmine, I'm going to finish watching your recording after, if that's okay.
Yeah, totally.
Okay, so Ashley is here. So Ashley's going to room 2.
Oh, wait, I want to message you, Jasmine.
Yeah.
Same thing.
Let's go to room 2. All right, Amara, where do you want to stay or go?
I'm gonna do the same thing. I'm gonna go with you, and I'm gonna watch the recording with Jasmine.
Okay.
Sounds good. Sounds good.
Time to do the passage myself too.
Okie doke.
Jasmine, I don't want to keep you.
Oh, I mean,
I
mean,
feel badly if I'm the only
it's
one.
not so bad. It's like
Okay.
literally whatever is most helpful for you. I don't do anything on Saturdays. Like the only thing I have on my docket is to go get a burger. There's this burger joint in Chicago called Oshaval. So if you ever visit, like that is like, I don't like burgers. Best burger I've ever seen ever.
That's amazing. Yeah, I'm like really struggling with RC. So if you have the time, but like
Oh,
I'll
I've got time. It's
Okay.
totally cool. So we can, is it helpful for me to put this all up on the screen or just keep it as it is?
You can keep it as it is. I have the PDF open as well.
Okie doke. And do you want to go back to any questions before we move on? I can get really in depth right now.
Yeah, I feel really lucky right now. I feel like let's keep going just so we can cover them all. And then, yeah, if we have time, maybe.
Yep. So 16, how are we feeling about this? So it indicates the early Actos and the Carpus were similar in what ways?
And so for this, I think too, it's tough because they're using these specific terms. So like probably good to go back and just, I think that's like starts in like line 26. So maybe just going over that.
Yeah.
Early Actos, skills or sketches.
I'm also super excited because now I can eat cake.
So the Actos is similar to a Carpus, but it's not the same thing. They're like,
right. They're asking what a shared similarity is. Like what's a similar trait that they both have? You can go down to the.
Is it the satire D?
Yes, this is correct. So if we think about where that line references, we know in 2 they talk about the satirizing the opposition in 36, and then the satire comes up in informal, often satirical shows in 47. How did you feel about that one?
That was probably like the easiest one so far, I think.
Right.
It's just like a matter of like, I think my biggest thing with RC is like, and maybe this is what they want, but like, they're so dense and I'm like, oh my God. And usually they come at the end of the prep test. So by that point, I'm like, oh my God, I cannot digest all of this.
Yeah.
So it's just like pinning down like what these key like phrases are and identifying, like linking these two.
Yeah, because if you know where to look and you know that you're going to, like, at least you know the paragraph, like you save yourself so much time. And part of that is like just remembering the structure of the argument. Like I have people who like they will write down like paragraph 1, paragraph 2, paragraph 3, and they will like this girl's so funny. She's like, I give myself 1 keyword. I maybe get 2 if it's a really big paragraph, but I get 1 keyword. I was like, impressive. I choose like 3 or 4 or 5, but but it helps her because then she's like, I know exactly where it is. It's in like the last part of the paragraph. I was like, I would have just given the whole paragraph.
Right.
But like, the more specific, if you can remember where it is, and like that's where like I'm a big highlighter. So if I know like they described it in paragraph 2 and I see I highlighted most of the stuff at the end, then I would use that one.
And on the flex, have you taken the?
I took the August flex.
Can you highlight on the flex?
Yeah, so
I know on the
test
they let you.
Yeah, so they've got like 3 different highlighting colors. You can underline. Pretty neat little gig. Khan Academy is decently similar. Like it has the same functionalities. It's not like exactly the same, but it's a good time.
Okay, that's good because I like doing that during like when I'm going through the exercises, but like obviously if that's not an option, I don't want to like abuse it.
Oh yeah, like I definitely wouldn't. Do you have Prep Plus or another test like 7 Sage or?
Yeah, I have Prep Plus, and And I think I also have 7 Sage. Yeah, I do.
Yeah. So Prep Plus is going to be exactly what the test is like, basically.
Yeah, that's what I do all my prep tests on, just so I'm like familiar with the platform and like the format and stuff, which
Yeah. Good. All right, now we're on 17. So it
Okay.
can be inferred from the passage that Valdez most likely held which one of the following views. So can we remember what did he, because for the most part, the author just gave us a lot of different thoughts. The author had an opinion in paragraph 3 with Yolanda, but when did Valdez's opinions come up? Because there weren't too many. There was one specific one that he had.
Yeah, so he kind of, because we know he started like, he's obviously like the one that's credited with the theater. Let's see, he guided the group. So I think the main one that I identified was that I think it's line 31 to 33. According to Valdez, the acto should suggest a solution to the problems exposed in the brief comic statement. And as with any good political theater, it should satirize the opposition and inspire the audience to social action.
Right. So we know that's going to be like his main idea. And if that's not going to be in the answer choices, then we're going to go and see what's consistent with what he's done. So that'll be like a tactic that we use, on similar passages. If it's not explicitly stated by the person, what is consistent with their actions?
Maybe A.
The Carpas were ill-suited to the type of theater that he and Teatro Campesino were trying to create. So when do they mention Carpas? What paragraph does that come up in?
That's in the 3rd paragraph. So they do describe how it's similar because of the satire. So I chose A because, I mean, I guess it doesn't explicitly say that there was like a part to incentivize like social action.
Yeah. So does Valdez come up in paragraph 3, like giving any more opinions?
Not giving opinions, no.
Right. So we know that they, like, the author is talking about Carpas, but we're asking like what would Valdez hold? And so there's not really anything giving us the idea that he would say Carpas were ill-suited to what he was trying to create, because if anything, we realize that the people he was working with were inspired by Carpas. And so, there's the similarities. Yolanda's argument is that they make their way into the actos.
Right. Okay. All right. Well, I don't think it's E.
Good.
So I feel like I can eliminate that.
Right. We don't talk about independent evaluation of aesthetic aspects. What does that mean?
The aesthetic aspects. Because I feel like Valdez is mostly concerned with the impact of the actos. So he doesn't really ever touch on, I mean, he might, like in another world, be concerned about it, but the passage doesn't specifically touch on his views related to like aesthetic aspects of the work.
Right.
I don't think we know enough about enough to infer that B is correct.
Right, because Cesar Chavez comes up in the beginning and he's like, let's work together, but we don't know if he should have done more. That's some pretty strong language, and I think we would have remembered that.
Yeah, I think so too. So that leaves us with C and D. I'm more inclined to choose D. Because again, I feel like based on his opinion, the key points of the Actos is to suggest a solution to problems and inspire social impact rather than like the talent of the specific actor. So I'm more inclined to choose that over C because I don't think, again, we have enough to go on based on Valdez's opinions to touch on the European tradition.
Right. And European tradition gets brought up at the very, very end of paragraph 3, where Yolanda is saying he kind of ties them together, but we have no idea what Valdez is saying about it. He doesn't say it's largely irrelevant. That's some strong language there. With D, so if you remember earlier, like we know Valdez, his only opinion that comes out is this idea of like what the Actos should be, what it should aspire to do, how it should be created. So this doesn't come in line with his specific verbal opinion, but this is consistent with what he does. Like he just brought all these random people. They weren't necessarily professional, theater artists, and they created these performances. Like he embraced the improvisations and all the things like that. So it definitely, we can infer from that he would agree that people don't require formal training.
Cool. That makes sense.
Alrighty. We're almost there. We got 3 more questions. Based on the passage, it can be concluded the author and Broyles Gonzalez, so that's our girl Yolanda down there, they hold essentially the same attitude toward what? And so the author doesn't have very many opinions here, but their opinion comes up in paragraph 3 with Yolanda, if we remember correctly.
Yes. So we can kind of focus on this last paragraph here, probably. So we know Yolanda criticizes historians for crediting Valdez individually. That's like a key point of an earlier question. Yep. So let's see here. Valdez artistic distinctive genre. I think C makes the most sense.
So what is the author's opinion about?
So the author's opinion is
and it's real subtle. It's one word.
Distinctive genre, early development. And is this? Am I looking in the right place? Like in the end of the?
Yeah, it's actually at the very beginning. So it says in her book. So we know Yolanda's criticizing it, but the author says she rightly criticizes, and that's what happens with the author. That's the only time they give their opinion here. And so the author believes that Yolanda is right in criticizing historians for the individual invention of Actos. And then, we start to trace her argument. So clearly the author is in agreement with her that, they have a genre, the carpas are similar. And then at the end, they start talking about, the links to the tradition, collective accomplishment. And he does, like, the author doesn't disagree with her. He's been in agreement with her so far, and they say that the contribution was crucial. And crucial is a very big word. That's a very strong word too. So like that's like the second place where the author gives us their opinion. But so far they have had no opinion whatsoever. And the fact that Valdez contributed, Valdez is creating this link between the initial corpus and then his own European tradition for his training. He creates this new genre. Like it couldn't have been created without him. It was crucial to create the distinctive genre.
So with that in mind, I think B doesn't really make sense, right?
Yeah, we don't talk about motives of the historians.
What did I say originally? C. Extent of Valdez acquaintance. I mean, I don't think they're really talking about the extent so much as the role he played.
Right. They're talking about Valdez and
Right.
the fact that he also contributed too. So we've got Valdez and we're talking about the corpus.
So I feel like E. Or more broadly, I guess, A, if we're talking about, maybe I'm focusing too much on Valdez.
Yeah. So they're saying both and. So what Yolanda does is bring in the importance of the corpus. And then at the end they say, well, Valdez was still important. So C, it focuses too much on the corpus, and then E focuses too much on Valdez and European tradition. But
Right.
generally, and so A, people skip over A because it's like, oh, that's such a vague answer choice. Influences, shaping, we want something with more action, but that's going to be just enough to get us to our answer because it involves both. It involves
Okay.
both the corpus and the European tradition at the end. And that's what they were saying. If we look back at it, it's neither corpus nor theater in the European tradition, but a distinctive genre with connections to both.
Yep. Okay. That makes sense. And so like in terms of answer options, are we looking at like for RC, can they be like, should they generally be more mild? Or does it kind of depend on the question type?
So it depends on the question. Maybe not so much the question type, but the question. So like for this, we can be concluded that's coming straight from the passage. So we know that it's either going to be super strong or it's going to be really non-committal, one or the other. And in this case, we know the author doesn't give a whole lot of opinions, and the author is pretty like subtle in their opinions, whereas Yolanda over here is pretty bold about her opinions, and she has a whole paragraph to talk about them. So if we know that there's a disconnect between the short, vague opinion and the very robust opinion, we're probably going to have something more on the author's side of like something probably more vague in general. But if this were talking about just Yolanda, we know that it could be it could be something vague, but it's more often going to be something very, very pointed and very bold. And this is because it's being concluded from the passage. So in a question where, like earlier, we have an inference. We have actors do not require formal training. Do not is a strong verb, but in terms of like what it's actually saying, it's like they don't need formal training. They can have it, but they don't need it. It's actually very, very broad in general. And we get it from looking at Valdez's like what Valdez did rather than what he said. So it's actually like very, very subtle.
Right. If it said like should not require, that would be a different.
Oh yeah, that would be, we would be in some trouble here.
Okay. Cool. I know it's like after the hour, so I don't want to keep you if you have.
Fine. I'm like literally the only things on my to-do list today are to eat this cake, get a burger, and we got the Wii Sports. I'm getting good at the tennis, so that is, yeah. I don't do much on Saturdays.
Perfect day. Okay, I will do my best to move efficiently through these.
Okay, I just want to make sure you understand.
Yeah, this is really helpful. I surprisingly, like, because I was like always a humanities and like liberal arts person, I just like assumed that RC would be my best section, and it's my worst.
Okay, I think I hate like everyone says that skills-based tests should be equalizing, and it's like, Well, it's not equalizing because it's not going with common sense. Like we're used to reading in certain ways, and you have to learn a whole different way of reading for this test in order to do it well. So don't be too hard on yourself. It just means that when you see dense passages about history and arts, you're not going to get scared. That's pretty much all that. That's like the initial, what do you call it? Advantage that you've got.
Yeah, that's true. I think it's just like, I feel like I've spent so much time, like, because logic games are like totally out of my comfort zone. So I was like spending so much time on that. And now I'm like, oh, I should also probably focus on this.
Okay, you're going to be just fine.
Okay, so information in the passage strongly supports which of the following scenes are teatro. This one's tough.
Yeah.
For this one, are we bringing new information in from the answer options, or we're just kind of like inferring?
So this is like a top-down question. So like everything in the passage would support one of these, not necessarily conclusions, but like this is kind of an inference.
Got it. Okay. I think B should be eliminated.
Yep. That
That's
mime
like,
troop. It's so random.
yeah, it's true, but it's not like the best answer.
Right. To our knowledge, he's the only one.
Right. C feels, yeah, I don't know, if C doesn't feel great to me. I think, given that the passage is focused on obviously like the theater aspect and where that came in, but also the purpose behind why this movement developed, that A makes the most sense.
Okay. So this is actually really hard because this is centering in on acceptance of farm owners. We actually don't talk about farm owners in our passage. So I'm curious, you said C didn't feel good. What was it that eliminated C for you? Or was it just like, what was really bugging you about that answer choice?
That it did not play a major role because Valdez approached Chavez about using theater to organize it. So I feel like that just didn't make a ton of sense to me, but maybe I was looking in the wrong part of the passage for that inference.
Right. So what, and I actually, when I was doing this with the other group, I didn't think it was C. And then we were like, well, we know that we don't talk about English and Spanish performances and non-Spanish speaking
Right.
audiences. And we know that we're not talking about critics in the United States or Mexico. So then we really had to evaluate E and what could be wrong with it. And I think did not play a major role. That's kind of tripping us up because we're thinking, oh, but the whole purpose of him coming there, like you said, was to work with Chavez and into these groups. But we can also look at the earliest efforts. And the earliest efforts, that's probably like the early 60s, really taking off in 65. And then we have to also think, was it called Teatro Campesino at that point? And so like
Right.
the origins of that group definitely played a part, but we don't know if they were around quite yet. So if we think about, I'm trying to find where that comes up. I should know where it is. All right. So like the early development of the Teatro Campesino was a collective accomplishment. So that's where that comes up. Definitely comes up before, I thought. Okay, well.
Because in the first paragraph, I guess they mention Chavez's unionizing efforts
Right.
in the early, or they just say in the 60s.
Yeah, in the 1960s, and they say by 1965.
And then the movement reaches its apex in the 70s. Okay, so if like we're saying it's the most popular in the 70s, like in the early 60s, perhaps at the beginning, it wouldn't be necessarily super popular.
Right. And if we think about like what our timeline looks like here, and I'll kind of just draw this out, the key word is like earliest. And so you're right, like we're going into like the 1960s. We've got I love drawing, it's so much fun. So like if we think about our timeline, you know, Chavez is out here in the 60s. Here's 65, where everything happens. And this is where everyone kind of coalesces. This is where Valdez comes to him. And then Teatro Campesino is resulting from that approach. And then we get to the 70s where it's in full swing. So we know that the activism and the organizing is happening even before there. So it wasn't part of the earliest efforts. And that's what's going to really get our answer choice down there. In number 18, is it? 19, like the earliest efforts. So the earliest efforts came before the Teatro Campesino even was in existence in 1965.
Got it. Okay. Yeah, I guess like none of the answers are awesome, but like C is the one that we can like actually draw an inference from the passage. Is that kind of the right way to look at it?
Can you repeat that? Sorry.
Like none of the answers are really like great at all. Even like maybe C is, it makes the most sense, but like upon first glance, as you said, like it doesn't seem to stick out as the correct answer.
Right. And I think that often it's easier to find wrong answers than it is to find right answers. And so like if we have strong reasons to eliminate D, E, and A, and we're between B and C, we can look at B and say like, is this actually supported by the passage that there were other members? Maybe Valdez was the only one in the Teatro Campesino that was in the mime troupe. Maybe he was the only one. We just don't have enough information. Whereas this one, you know, we're like, it doesn't sound right, but it sounds more right than B. So what's going on with the particularities of the language? And then if we kind of look at it, like in the earliest efforts, that's the key roles. Like it did not play in a major role. If it said it did not play a major role in achieving international recognition, we'd probably just weed that out. But it's the earliest efforts part that really gets us.
Right. Okay.
All right. 20. Woo!
Right.
Last one.
It.
Another most strongly supports question. So the passage most strongly supports which one of the following?
I don't think it's A.
Right. Because we don't have discussion or analysis. US and Mexican theater historians. We don't know where the historians are coming from.
Right. B, I'm like unsure, so I'll maybe come back to it. C. I think we can eliminate E as well.
Right. Because we don't know what happened afterward.
Right. So I'm thinking the best answer is C.
So in directing the actos of Teatro Campesino, Valdez went to great lengths to simulate or recreate certain aspects of what audiences had experienced in the carpas. All right. I'm kind of liking this answer choice, but it's actually not it. So let's think about what's going on here. So we know he directed it, but they don't really talk about what's going on. And the key here that eliminates is it went to great lengths, you know, so it's like this was like his chief effort. And we don't know if he was simulating anything or recreating, like he probably was recreating, but it's not necessarily the audiences. It's what, you know, his, like what the initial farm workers were. We don't know if they were the performers. We don't know if they were the audiences, but he was concerned with what those people who are on the picket lines were doing. And so there's a couple like really subtle things in here that make that wrong.
So this is almost like a little bit too specific or too strong to be the correct answer. Is that?
Yeah, it's a little too specific. But if they had said Valdez simulated or recreated certain aspects of experiences, it's vague enough to where it could be the answer.
Okay. So now we have B and D left. I want to just refer back to the passage about B. (1960s). I don't think B makes sense.
I'm telling you that.
I think, where did it go? There it is. Comedy was a prominent feature. In the second paragraph, the acto became the quintessential form. I think I'm getting hung up on the line 35. It says brief comic statement. So my inclination is that like comedy isn't necessarily the main point, but maybe if all actos have, wait, is it saying actos? If all actos have comedy in them as like an inherent trait, then I guess maybe B could make sense.
Yeah. So let's take it this way. How do we feel about the alternative? How do we feel about D?
Yeah, well, that's the other thing is I feel like D, we don't really have any evidence on whether Valdez was actually like composing scripts.
Mm-hmm. And I would also say we don't know if the actors modified it for their own interests.
Right. So again, B would be the...
It's the least worst answer. But so we'll think about it. So comedy was a prominent feature of Chicano theater in the 1960s. So we can just kind of start with what do they say about Chicano theater. And in 32, it says, you know, the acto was quintessential Chicano theater. And then he says, you know, it should have a brief comic statement. And so I think that, you know, we think brief. Well, brief doesn't seem quite right, but there is comedy in there.
Right.
And satire also can be interpreted as comedy as well, I suppose. But because it's what Valdez says should be included, it's a prominent feature. And so we kind of have to check ourselves. It doesn't mean it's the most like, it's not making up most of the feeder, but it is an important aspect of classifying it.
Right. That makes sense. Okay.
So
I mean, this all makes sense to me. I think it's like talking through it is really helpful. But yeah, it's definitely like a very different way of analyzing and like interpreting passages. So I guess like I just need to keep like, what do you suggest like is the best way to improve here? Like, should I be like going through wrong answers from like a prep test, or what would you recommend?
I definitely recommend looking at your wrong answers, because I mean, most people stop at this was right and this was wrong, but this is such a psychological test, and the reading comp section especially is testing how do you analyze the way we want you to analyze. So if you think about like what led you to pick your wrong answers and how you can strategize around that in the future, you're going to come up with a whole list of strategies for yourself. And you're the only person who can do that. You're the only person who can get into your head and understand why you picked something. So like for this question too, we didn't like D. We definitely knew that this wasn't supported by the text. And in B, we saw where, we could stretch it, but it was more, we had issue with how it was phrased.
Right.
That's something where, it's like if you have an issue with how something's phrased, but you can still link it to the passage, we don't want to eliminate it right away. We'll see if we're waiting out for anything better that doesn't have any issues. That's one of the most common strategies that people need to use, is thinking, okay, do I like it because there's something weird with the wording and like I'm just gonna choose it because it's just wording? Or is there something wrong with like the actual content of the test? Like, are they actually still like, is this just not right at all? Because the wording is what gets people. Sometimes people would have like, I definitely probably would have eliminated this the first time I read it. But it's like, technically we can pull it back. This is the only thing we can pull back to the passage.
Okay. Yeah, I'm definitely like, that sounds totally like what I've been doing, is like, I'll read it and be like, nope, that doesn't add up. So I'm just going to eliminate it off the bat. But like, maybe just like saying like, not sure, leaving it, and then coming back would be a good strategy. And thank you again for sharing the wrong answer sheet. I started using it, so I'm looking forward to like diving in and taking advantage of that.
Oh, definitely.